Today we welcome Amy Otzel. Amy is a retired U.S. Army Behavioral Health Sergeant, Iraq War Combat Theater veteran, and a former U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs Readjustment Counseling therapist. Also a past Connecticut State Military Support Program clinician and advocate who served as a co-chairperson of the CTVA Mental Health Community Advisory Board. Amy's personal journey to inspire her own health recovery and the healing from trauma has enhanced her endeavor to contribute forward in helping service to others. With an emphasis on conditions of trauma and stress, she promotes natural and vitalistic methods for balancing wellness and is committed to holistically minded strengths and empowerment-based mental health counseling with those she has the honor to support. Additionally, Amy routinely contributes to educational service as a Yale University School of Medicine Department of Psychiatry lecturer, a professional development educator, a holistic health and stress management instructor, and an advanced level 3 breath, body, mind teacher for survivors of trauma. This morning, the WSPIC group and DEMAS and the Connecticut Women's Consortium welcomes Amy Otzel. Amy, take it away.
Okay, hello, good morning, everyone. Sheila, thank you so much for the introduction. And it is quite my privilege to be here today. So let me go ahead and share my screen so that we could get started. There we go. Okay, can folks see the PowerPoint up on the screen now? Excellent, and it seems like everyone can hear me just fine. Perfect. Okay, great. So, okay. Okay, so again, thank you all for having me here at your meeting. It was quite nice to be introduced by Sheila, and I just want to say that though I don't have the privilege of being introduced to each and every one of you on the webinar today, what I do know is that each of you as a collective are joining together and forming and learning community, coming together as a group of individuals who in some way, in some very important ways, are a part of other people's help, support, healing, recovery, etc. So I just want to express appreciation and gratitude to each of you for being in the role and in the capacity that you serve every day. So thank you all for that. All right, so what brings us here today, learning about nutrition and stress. And I invite you all to consider an intention for this training time. And really, I invite you to just simply be open and present with the information. In a short amount of time, just about an hour and a half's time, we're going to learn a lot. Probably about some information that we haven't really heard too much before, that we haven't learned, though nutrition is a part of everyday choices multiple times a day. And there's so much about it that we can utilize to harness and empower different choices. But my point to this is in no way to overwhelm you and not think that after the presentation that you have to go and make radical changes by any means, but just remembering that information is empowering and it can support different opportunities and different choices. So nobody can do everything, but we all can do something. So just take from this presentation a time to consider how you may inform your self-care and learn how to shift and grow accordingly to what makes sense for you in your life. So to start, we've got Hippocrates here with a very long history of being the father of medicine. Hippocrates is actually still considered the father of medicine. And he carries a quote, "Let thy food be thy medicine, and let thy medicine be thy food." Though Hippocrates is still considered to be the founding father of medicine, his method and his concepts of medicine have not necessarily been remembered or carried into our conventional way of understanding health care and medical care today. So Hippocrates believed in the healing power of nature, and that the body drives its own healing, and that everybody has a life force of energy inside of them. And as long as you support the life force, utilizing natural phenomenon like air and water and food, we can in fact harness health, or we can, of course, in different ways, cause illness. So when we think about nutrition and its role in managing or causing stress, we think about it in terms of being a complementary or alternative approach or a part of integrative medicine. And the reason why it falls under this category is because it's not a part of conventional medicine today. Conventional methods typically look at disease states and intervening in different kinds of ways, like with surgeries or medications. So though, of course, nutrition is, again, a part of our everyday lives, it is falling under the realm of an integrative model of care. It is encapsulated in a holistic paradigm, not just that we acknowledge mind, body, spirit, emotions, relationships, etc., but that it really comes from a platform of mind, body, and spirit being inseparable. Inseparable meaning that all parts dynamically influence the other, and that we cannot mechanistically separate facets of our bodies and our minds from the self. It also falls under a vitalistic philosophy, which essentially means that we have a life force energy inside of us, and that all things that are living want to go towards health and healing, and the support of that under the best conditions. Also a part of this is the concept of biochemical individuality, which essentially means that each and every person is unique in their physiological, biological environment, that no two beings have the same needs and no two beings have the same differences, that we are all unique and individual, and thereby applying any one mechanism or any one intervention is not going to be appropriate for every person. And it also falls under a paradigm and a philosophy of a new ecology of health. Essentially, that we don't have to wait for disease to set in, that we can, in fact, utilize education and information to empower our choices and take charge of our health and have a more frontline role in our own healing. So, who pays attention to the role of nutrition and stress, as well as nutrition and mental health? And where did I inform today's presentation from? Well, there are lots of specialties. Some of them may be unfamiliar, but there is actually a tremendous amount of research and journals and books, etc., that focus on nutrition as a mechanism of stress management as well as a promotion of mental health. So orthomolecular medicine essentially espouses the principles of that biochemical individuality, that everyone has an optimal nutritional environment inside their body. And when we can identify what that is for the person, we can assist and support utilizing nutrients to promote health or the recovery from disease. Functional medicine attends to the intersection and inseparability of our nervous system, of our psychological beings, of our immune system, endocrine system. And naturopathic medicine essentially focuses on the healing power of nature, vitalistic energy, and essentially taking away what the body doesn't need, eliminating all things that don't promote health and wellness and that vitalistic energy, and then getting out of the way and letting the body have what it needs for optimal health and wellness. Nutritional medicine believes that nutrients are essential for everyone's optimal functioning, of course, and different schools of psychiatry, biological, orthomolecular, and nutritional psychiatry, emphasize how nutrients and biochemical environments promote or disable our ability to maintain wellness. Additionally, there are many books out there now that serve to take very scientific and hard to understand information and put them in easy to read and easy to understand ways. And I used a few of these books, of course, to support the presentation, but also I learned a great deal of this from a few of my mentors. One, a PhD in health psychology and stress management, Dr. Brian Luke Seward, and also two integrative psychiatrists, Dr. Richard Brown and Dr. Patricia Gerbarg out of New York, who essentially emphasize the science behind, the research behind, and the treatment of managing stress and mental health conditions, utilizing nutrition as well as natural methods of supplementation. And as you certainly heard in the introduction, I myself, having such a significant background in stress during my military service career, especially while deployed overseas, was my own case study. I suffered for about 9 years, rather extensively, with a myriad of stress-related injuries and ailments, and of course, psychological unwellness. And in 9 years of trying to readjust and recover, I struggled greatly with some more conventional methods and never really returned to a state of psychological or physiological health. And very importantly, I began to examine and research other mechanisms of what I can do to take care of myself. And so following that period, I began to engage with different types of providers and start looking at different aspects of lifestyle and wellness that I could take charge of. And nutrition was an enormous one. One was recovering from the deleterious effects of stress on my metabolic and biochemical environment of my own body, and then sustaining that with better nutrition choices. So I really come from a place of lived experience, wholeheartedly privileged to have the information and the ability to utilize what I learned to take care of myself and do so successfully. So from all of that, in the email you all received yesterday from Sheila, you got a lot of handouts, and one of them was a reference and resource page. So you have a list of so many different books and journals and online websites and search platforms that you can use following this presentation, either to reference the material today or to continue pursuit of your own learning following. Okay, so to start, let's take a look at a theory that helps us to conceptualize the relationship between nutrition and mental status, nutrition and stress, nutrition and mental health. So Ruth Lacey Wallace is a clinical psychiatric dietitian who has extensively studied and researched and written about the psychonutriologic person. We do not have many different theories about how this all relates, but this one happens to be the most widely accepted at present. So what Ruth tells us is that nutritional status and mental health or well-being are interrelated in ways that can be assessed and treated for the improvement of health and quality of life. And there are three different ways in which this can relate. That mental status, in fact, impacts the choices that we make about food, as well as the nutrients that our body is able to intake and process. That food and nutrient intake impacts mental status as well. So they're both recursively influencing one another. And also that physical state changes in our body, disruptions to our GI system, disruptions to our immune system, things like bariatric surgery, etc., impact our nutrient supply, thereby impacting our mental status. And each of these go back around in a circle and impact each other. What we know scientifically about the nutritional and psychological mechanisms of action are that nutrients do support or interfere with normal development or maintenance of our brain and our central nervous system. Nutrients serve as neurotransmitter precursors. They supply our brain with an energy source and the ability to utilize that energy. Nutrients influence whether or not we express a gene. They certainly have pharmacologic functions. Nutrients contribute to our mood, sense of well-being, and our psychological function. And how our bodies utilize nutrients are impacted by widespread cellular changes due to our thoughts and emotions. So to start fleshing this out a bit, let's take a look at what some of these nutrients do. So firstly, we have macronutrients. Macro, because we need them in larger amounts through the course of each day. Carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates have been known to be feared in our society, that the dreaded carbohydrate is going to cause us to gain weight, not feel well, etc. But little known, very important science tells us that carbohydrates are actually extraordinarily important to our well-being, because carbohydrates impact our normal levels of serotonin in the brain. The way in which this happens is that when a carbohydrate is present in the body, our body utilizes it in the form of glucose. Glucose is actually the preferred fuel of our central nervous system. It's the preferred fuel of our brain. Our brain needs it for energy and optimization. So our body utilizes a carb as glucose. Glucose is carried to the brain through insulin that is secreted in the pancreas. And when it is traveling through the blood, carried in insulin, it creates an opportunity for more tryptophan to be in the blood. Tryptophan is important. We often think of it as the amino acid that causes us on Thanksgiving when we eat turkey to be very tired. But tryptophan is actually a precursor to the production of serotonin. So tryptophan in its activated form in the brain is called 5-HTP or 5-hydroxytryptophan. And that molecule goes on to produce serotonin. So the more tryptophan that's in the blood, the more that will make it to the brain, and thereby, overall, the more serotonin we will be able to produce. And as we know, serotonin is linked to our ability to achieve a sense of contentment, happiness, as well as regulate our sleep, among other things. Now, fats and lipids. Well, fats and lipids also have been oftentimes dreaded as well because of what we know about fats. Well, of course, just like carbohydrates, it depends on the types of carbs and fats that we are taking in. There are certain fats that, like trans fats, that can actually erode our neurons in the brain, because good fats are very important for the neurons in our brain. Fats and lipids are critical for our nerve transmission between our brain and the rest of our body. The dendrites and synapses of our neurons in the brain are 80% lipids. And all of our neurotransmitters in the brain must cross those membranes during signaling. So essentially what that means is that if you can, in some of your background, you may have learned about neurons in the brain. Well, each of our neurons has a myelin sheath that allows for better conduction, for the action potential of our nerves to fire and receive the signaling. In order for the myelin sheath to be flexible and to be fluid enough to conduct the amount of action potential needed, we have to have a very fluid and flexible membrane, which is nourished by appropriate fats and lipids. And we'll talk about different good nutrients coming up. So essentially, when we don't have this fluidity and flexibility across our neurons, we cannot conduct signaling and thereby transport messages. And deficits or imbalances in appropriate fats and lipids cause a lot of cognitive deficit, brain fog and brain fatigue, slowed thinking, as well as inflammation in our joints. Proteins. Well, proteins and their synthesis has a much more scientific complexity than I am able to reverbalize to you folks today, like the carb. But our proteins are, of course, our amino acids. These are the building blocks of our lives, and they impact the synthesis of so many different important and mood stabilizing neurotransmitters. From our feel-good neurotransmitters to our neurotransmitters that help us respond to stress successfully, as well as recover from stress successfully. And deficiency in proteins causes a full range of mood issues because of how many are in fact impacted in synthesis if they are not sustained properly. So how about micronutrients? These are nutrients that we need in less milligrams, if you will, a day compared to our macronutrients. Vitamins. Well, vitamins often serve as coenzymes that activate enzyme function. Enzymes facilitate chemical reactions in the body necessary to our life and health. And enzymes and coenzymes play a significant role in both the peripheral nervous system as well as the central nervous system. So to say that simply, if a vitamin is not present or if it cannot bond to an enzyme, then the chemical reactions in our body in totality are slowed down and cause a cascade of problems and complications in our functioning overall. Again, in our brain and body. So that may be with our mood, it may be with movement and function. Minerals and elements are necessary for metabolism. So in all, we have to have the proper minerals and elements available for all of those other nutrients to be able to do their job. Carbs, proteins, vitamins, fats, and lipids. We need minerals present to allow for those nutritionally derived properties to be broken down and used properly. And as I mentioned before, with the myelin sheath being well nourished by fats and lipids, good fats like olive oils and coconut oils and omega-3 fatty acids, we want to be able to have minerals present so that our neurons have the ability to achieve the action potential. So many minerals and elements serve as electrolytes, such as sodium, calcium, chloride, and potassium, which we need in a correct balance to allow for the firing of the neurons for those messages and signals to cross to make everything work. And when we are deficient in these, it typically impacts our cognitive function. And sometimes with minerals and elements, we can have too much, and that can cause us to have toxicity that also impacts our physical function. So it's very important for our minerals to be in balance. So how about water? Well, not just because our bodies are more than 70% water, we need to be well hydrated because water will aid in the absorption and digestion of all of those nutrients that we just discussed. And being well hydrated facilitates the transport of those nutrients throughout the body, and it helps us carry waste products out of the body. It also helps us carry waste products out of the brain. And water supports our central nervous system through the cerebrospinal fluid. Our cerebrospinal fluid is 99% water. We have to be well hydrated for the whole to work. Additionally, we want to eliminate as well, because when we hold toxins in, whether it's constipation or whatnot, if we can't move it out, we typically feel pretty cruddy, right? All right, so we've learned a bit about what these nutrients do. Well, how then are they challenged when we experience stress? And I have the S here as a domino field, because essentially stress, just kind of one thing leads to another, and can cause a whole cascade of complications and problems. Let's begin thinking about stress with some reminders of some definitions. Homeostasis. Homeostasis is essentially when our body is able to achieve balance within its autonomic nervous system. When biochemically we are in equilibrium without any stress activation. Well, once we're in homeostasis, we can in fact experience a stress response. One thing to remember is that with stress can be real or perceived possible. So our body doesn't discriminate between being under actual real threat, like almost in a car accident or in a car accident, versus being driving down the road and being under a state of stress, being worried or concerned about getting into an accident. So just as an example, but essentially our body will respond in different degrees, whether or not we are truly in a stress experience or we are thinking about one, thinking about the doom and gloom of the past or the worry for the future. So the stress response is caused by activation, and that activation happens in the hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal axis. And when the HPA axis is ignited, it causes a whole cascade of biochemical changes in our body, typically with our catecholamines, and it leads to a heightened state of arousal because the activation is preparing us in our organs and tissues to fight or flee. We want to be able to respond to stress. And allostasis is a process of responding to stress activation by returning to a biochemically balanced state. It's that once we've been activated into the stress response, we are able to successfully achieve a return to homeostasis. So looking at both sides here, we of course have our central nervous system, which is the brain and spine, and it sort of branches off into our autonomic nervous system, which has two facets: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system is, of course, our stress response, and our parasympathetic is our relaxation response. The fight or flight response is a life-saving mechanism, again, helps our body prepare for fighting or fleeing by increasing blood flow, blood pressure, heart rate, breathing faster so we get more oxygen to our muscles. We tend to go into a very narrow focus or tunnel vision. It is a state in which we are socially disconnected and detached. And of course, there's so much more. And with our parasympathetic system, this is the element of rest and digest. When we are in good parasympathetic tone, we promote our body's ability to heal, repair, and recharge. It is essentially important to the anti-inflammation of our body. It brings down inflammation by having good tempered blood flow, etc., and good tempered oxygen to all of our cells. We tend to be in a more open focus and not as narrow. And when we are in good parasympathetic tone, we have the ability to connect and experience social bonding with others. So to take a look at this, for the activation, we essentially perceive a real or possible stressor in our amygdala. That is in the limbic system of the brain. The limbic system is the emotional powerhouse of the brain. And when the amygdala bell goes off, our HPA axis activates and thereby activates our autonomic nervous system. And there is a whole cascade of biochemical release of different hormones, neurotransmitters, and neuropeptides. One hormone of importance is cortisol. People often are aware that cortisol is the stress hormone. That having fight or flight is a successful capability because essentially, evolutionarily, we have been able to run from danger and survive. That is good. But when we experience too much of the activation, we have deleterious effects from stress due to an overabundance of cortisol disruption. Now, one thing that folks don't commonly know about cortisol is that cortisol's primary function is intended to regulate insulin in the pancreas. And as you recall from learning about how our brain gets its fuel by way of the carbohydrate and how we are able to synthesize something like serotonin, we need insulin to be regulated well so that it can carry glucose, among other things, like tryptophan, etc., to our brain. Well, cortisol, having the primary function of regulating insulin in the pancreas, is going to actually be diverted for the sake of fight or flight. Essentially, fight or flight trumps everything. In order to sustain our survival, that's going to come first. So cortisol will fall offline and disrupt our ability to regulate insulin in the pancreas, which, as we know, can cause a whole series of other endocrine types of issues. And oftentimes I wonder how much of that, this is just my wonderment, by the way, I wonder how much of that plays a role in our public health crisis of type 2 diabetes. Even when I think about all the Vietnam veterans I have worked in treatment with over the years, the majority of them with PTSD additionally have diabetes. Certainly that has been linked to Agent Orange exposure, but we are also seeing diabetes wreaking havoc across our society at large. And when you are not able to regulate insulin in the pancreas, we typically have more weight problems as well as more diabetes. Just a thought, but an interesting thing to know about cortisol, that it falls offline with its primary purpose for the sake of fight or flight. So when we think about autonomic regulation, we essentially want to be in a state of alert calm, where the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are at ease and functioning optimally. And we relate this to the concept of resilience. Resilience is defined psychosocially as the ability to bounce back from adversity. But neurobiologically, resilience is defined as our ability to maintain homeostasis following an experience of stress, or enhanced allostasis. Regrettably, though, us Americans have found ourselves in a state of sympathetic dominance. We have, especially over the past 20 years, have had an increase in demands, an increase in all sorts of stressors, burdens on systems, finances, childcare, education, work. I'm sure many of the folks on this training today may be doing the job of 3 for the salary of 1. We have a great deal of stress and demands in our life. And states of chronic and prolonged or uncontrollable stress put an extreme toll on our ability to manage stress. And with sympathetic dominance, we tend to have general hyperarousal. There's so many, of course, other symptoms of that, but to coin a term to capture the entirety of that, we are in a real state of hyperarousal. And when we have parasympathetic weakness, when we don't have good relaxation tone, to sort of put a category around all the symptoms, we tend to experience a great deal of malaise, right? We have more immune dysregulation. We tend to get sick more frequently, cannot heal as quickly. We oftentimes experience a great deal of physical, mental, emotional fatigue, and more. A lot of GI disruption as well. And stress, of course, is an equal opportunity destroyer. It impacts all aspects of our being across all domains of functioning. So to think about how stress becomes such a problem, we look back to Hans Selye and his general adaptation syndrome. So stage 1 is the alarm reaction, right? We perceive a threat and we have stress activation. Stage 2 is when our body tries to return to homeostasis. But if we continue to have ongoing threat, or we continue to perceive worries and doom and gloom of the past, etc., complete homeostasis is never returned. We cannot achieve it. And eventually that leads us in the domino fall to stage 3, a stage he called exhaustion, where essentially one or more of the organs targeted by metabolic processes can no longer meet its demands. And importantly, how our bodies utilize nutrients and how many nutrients are needed is significantly impacted by these chronic states of stress. We always, as a physical being, need to be in a state of regularity. If stress is regular in our life or in our mind, we essentially, as a body, adapt to it. We always have to be in a state of normalcy. So in our autonomic nervous system, the dysregularity, the sympathetic dominance, and the parasympathetic weakness will turn into what is normal for our body. So autonomic nervous system dysregulation becomes a new normal. And we then feel very imbalanced and unwell. So how then does stress affect nutrition? And really, how does nutrition affect stress? Well, stress affects all aspects of nutrition. One, the nutrients. Well, food impacts our mood and mood impacts our food. We return to that psychonutriologic person that Ruth Lacey Wallace describes. Stress affects digestion and absorption by way of falling offline to preserve energy for our body to essentially maintain a state of fight or flight. Again, anything that our body perceives as a life-sustaining necessity, so if that's fight or flight because I'm under stress, that will trump other aspects of function. So digestion and absorption are going to fall offline. If you cannot digest properly, if your digestion is sluggish, or if your digestion is too fast, you will not absorb all of the nutrients that you are taking in a way that your body can metabolize them correctly and disseminate them throughout your body. So the two major systems of our body that fall offline due to stress is digestion and reproduction. We do not need to reproduce in the moments of being under fight or flight. And our body uses a lot of energy to digest properly. So it is an energy saving process. So just to kind of put this in an example for you, if you are driving to work down 91 or 95 and you're running late because of crazy traffic and you're trying to eat your bagel or your waffle or whatever you've got, even if it's your banana or your pear, and you're thinking about all the things that you have to do at work, all the things you have to do at home later, the stresses of the holiday season, what's going on with the kids or family, or disruptions in relationships, etc., you are not going to find yourself in a good state of alert calm to digest what you're eating. And oftentimes we do that too, even if we're not driving, if we're at our house and our apartments and we're trying to do other work while eating, or maybe eating while at work at our desks, etc. And of course, with elimination can be too rapid or too slow, and it can have consequences to, again, our ability to, if it's too fast, to absorb and thereby have nothing to metabolize, or if it's too sluggish, again, how we harbor and maintain all of those toxins that impacts the way we feel physically as well as mentally and emotionally. Now, to speak more to the cascade of stress just sort of taking a toll on our body, I shared with you in the resource packets that you received by email yesterday, a brief article called The Domino Effect that you can learn a bit more following today by taking a look at this article. So you have that for your reference. So next, with stress affecting all aspects of nutrition, it also depletes the nutrients that we have in our body, and more of them than I even have listed here. So the stress response requires a proper nutritional state. In order for our body to activate the stress response, we have to correctly and efficiently and effectively, we have to have a good nutritional state to begin with. But additionally, the toll and the amount of needed nutrients to sustain and essentially unfold that stress response, it uses a lot of nutrients. So when we are in a state of stress, important nutrients are used in such greater degree that we depreciate our stores of them. So stress, of course, demands more heightened physiological function, using more energy, more oxygen, more circulation. More metabolic cofactors are needed for the stress response. So our bodies are going to be using more vitamins and more minerals. So more need to be replenished. And the stress response increases the release of our neurohormones. So we need more carbs and proteins because they, of course, as we learned, are precursors, and we need more of them to replenish these stores. So we need a good nutritional state to begin with to have a good stress response. But the stress response itself is going to use more nutrients, and thereby we need to replenish them in more ways. The problem with that is that stress often leads to poor eating habits. We can find ourselves too busy, too tired, too achy, and too much pain, or we might eat to pacify uncomfortable emotions. So sometimes our choices are not going to lead us to ones that have vital nutrition in them. So a lot of times stress causes us to choose foods that not only don't replenish our nutritional state, but in effect, we commonly under stress happen to choose foods that trigger the stress response itself, thereby creating a whole nother cascade and vicious circle. So let's think about that. We may opt for simple carbohydrates. It's actually kind of clever as a craving for our body under stress to go towards simple carbs. That's our white sugars and white flours and refined sugars, because in effect, they act fast. They act very quickly, and we can get a burst of energy within 30 minutes or so. But when we intake those simple carbohydrates, it actually causes our nervous system to release more epinephrine, triggering that stress response to increase heart rate and blood pressure. And so it actually is clever. I'm feeling sluggish. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Let me grab something quick. What I take in is going to give me a quick fix, but in totality, it's actually compromising and undermining the process as a whole. Additionally, when we are under stress, we tend to go for stimulants, coffee, caffeine, those types of drinks. Well, does caffeine, coffee, teas, sodas, things like that stimulate you and can help boost from that sense of malaise and fatigue from stress compromising us? Sure, it'll work in terms of the stimulation, but caffeine, its bioactive constituent is methylxanthine. And methylxanthine works by significantly activating the sympathetic nervous system, thereby causing that state of arousal that we're looking for, that kind of wake up, if you will. But it in fact exacerbates the process by continuing to keep the stress response in a state of activation and imbalance with the relaxation response. Excitotoxins. Well, excitotoxins are things like MSG, which allowed it by the Food and Drug Administration. We allow MSG, monosodium glutamate, to be called by over 40 different names on ingredient lists. So it is very difficult to identify if MSG is in a product. And what's more is that there is a scientific way of actually naturally making MSG. I can't really recall exactly what it is. I believe it has something to do with potatoes, though. But there is a scientific way of engineering MSG naturally. So creatively in certain ingredients, oftentimes like seasoning packets, like if you're going to make like a ranch dip or something like that. In seasoning packets, oftentimes they'll say, you know, all natural. Well, it's very confusing because they can actually label it that way if they have naturally rendered MSG. MSG is an excitotoxin. Other types of excitotoxins are fake sugars like aspartame, sucralose, etc. It's called an excitotoxin because in everyone's brain, the degree of which varies across brains, but in everyone's brain, it causes activation and excitement of the neurons. And additionally, because of the nature of the non-food ingredient, it's a chemical. It's a chemical. Aspartame is chemical. Sucralose is a chemical. MSG is a chemical. Because of its chemical constituency, it has an erosive effect on our neuronal membranes that we need, again, to be fluid and flexible. So excitotoxins, especially if we build them up and happen to be someone who is particularly sensitive to them, it could be causing more agitation than others. MSG also causes us, it makes food taste really good. It does. MSG is loaded in things like soups and seasoning dips and chips. Doritos are amazing, but the MSG is what really brings out that flavor, and it has deleterious effects on our ability to maintain our homeostasis and good autonomic regulation. And additionally, causes us to become more hungry, especially things like sucralose and aspartame. If you remember, the preferred fuel of the central nervous system of the brain is, in fact, glucose. Carbohydrate uses it as glucose. Glucose is a sugar. When the body believes it is getting sugar, it is happy because it is the preferred fuel of the brain. The brain is happy to get it. But it's trickery with these chemical sugars. They're not real sugars. They're chemicals. So in essence, the brain is tricked into thinking it's getting fuel. And then when it doesn't have the fuel because it can't process it the same way, it actually causes our body to release other hormones that stimulate more hunger because now it wants to be satisfied by way of getting more. It wants to get what it thought it had. And then that can commonly lead to us trying to go towards more simple carbs because we want now to get it quick. Alcohol. Alcohol, as we know, can calm us down. It's a depressant, right? It can help relax us. But important to understand is that when alcohol is moved through our bloodstream to be eliminated from our body, much like the methylxanthine in caffeine, its byproducts metabolize and go right to the sympathetic nervous system to activate it. Now, in a more extreme form of alcohol use, and maybe one that we've experienced on a night in college, you may remember you fell asleep with no problem, but you probably slept very poorly and you probably didn't sleep very long. You woke up and it was too early, you needed more sleep. Point being is, yes, alcohol depresses the sympathetic nervous system to start, causing us to, in fact, calm down. But as we process it out, it does the opposite. It excites our sympathetic nervous system. GMOs, genetically modified organisms. These are not well understood, but they've been used to engineer our food for a couple of decades now. GMOs are when we, let's say, we are trying to grow more hardy tomatoes and we splice tomatoes with fish genes. Well, is it now truly a tomato? I don't know. But we don't really understand yet scientifically the enormity of consequence of GMOs. But what we do know is that our immune systems identify them as foreign invaders. If you are eating a tomato spliced with fish genes, your immune system, your body is going to get confused. And essentially, it activates more fight for your body to adapt to it and process it. So our immune systems are fantastic. We have great immune functioning as human beings. But as with anything, our immune systems have a threshold. And especially with stress and environmental toxins and all other kinds of impacts to our bodies, from the hairspray we use to deodorants to the food we eat to what we're breathing in, etc., our immune systems get overtaxed. And that way, this can cause more systemic inflammation, which essentially means that our cells throughout our body are overtaxed, inflamed, and causes a variety of different consequences over time in different people. And of course, toxins, foods that are that have pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, etc., or non-food ingredients, or like dyes. We see a lot of different binders being used in food. We see different dyes being used in food. And these, again, might not cause an immediate reaction unless you're someone sensitive to them. But over time, it adds to the onslaught of impacted immune overhaul, and thereby all of that leads to more physiological stress. Physiological stress is stress just like stress that is actual or perceived otherwise. So, in your email, you received some other handouts. These are for your own use or reference: a stress-related eating behavior questionnaire and a self-assessment. It can help you take some time to focus on your own self-care and reflect on different elements of your daily choices related to nutrition and stress. And what I will say, all of the handouts that you've received are also handouts that you can reproduce and disseminate or use with your clients. Again, I'm not sure what everybody's role here is today, but all of these sheets are reproducible. They come from my mentor, Dr. Brian Luke Seward. He is a native of Glastonbury, Connecticut, but lives 3/4 of the time in Colorado. Again, an expert in stress and health psychology. And all of his worksheets are reproducible with permission, and he gives it. Okay. So when we think now again about nutrition and stress, there's a lot going on here. So stress management is very similar in definition to resilience in terms of the neurobiological definition. Psychosocially, it's a spectrum of techniques aimed at controlling one's stress, especially chronic stress. And much like resiliency, neurobiologically, it's the ability to maintain homeostasis following an experience of stress, or again, that enhanced allostasis. In all, good nutrition is in fact stress management. You can probably deduce that from all of the information that you have received previous, especially when we simplify all of that into understanding that we need to have a good nutritional state of being in order to have and manage the stress response well, but also recognizing the role in nutrition being so important to replenishing our body to be able to maintain health and balance from the impact of the stress response. So I spoke about this in another slide previous, but essentially we have to remember sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. Parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest. We need to be in good parasympathetic tone in order to digest, absorb, metabolize, and eliminate properly. If we are eating in a state of fight or flight, which because of that general adaptation syndrome, we may be in a state of chronic dysregulation, but when our body adapts to it, we actually might not even realize what a state of stress our body is under. We might not necessarily be able to perceive it. So it's important to practice good parasympathetic exercise to support our body's ability to utilize our nutrition properly. And it's going to also help us in good parasympathetic tone to make more mindful choices. And I added mindless and mindful chewing here because oftentimes when we are not focusing just on eating, we can be chomping away and not paying attention to how much we eat either, and kind of get lost in it, whether we're watching TV or talking to someone or doing work or whatnot. But the first cue for our body to begin digesting is actually perceiving the food. If you take a banana or a bagel, no matter what it is, and you look at it, your body is going to start salivating. You will have salivation beginning inside of your mouth. All these different biochemical changes are happening, and our ability to digest properly begins with the enzymes that are in our saliva and our ability to chew our food more. The more we chew, it actually sends a message to our brain and helps us actually get full quicker. But additionally, it obviously breaks down the food that we're eating more as well to assist in our digestion. So thinking about being in good parasympathetic tone, actually, a stress management strategy of diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing, relaxation breathing, is helpful to our ability to promote good nutrition in our body, because breathing engages our parasympathetic nervous system. It puts us into a state of rest and digest. But what's more is that when we are belly breathing, breathing for relaxation, the action of the three-part breathing, engaging our diaphragm through the abdomen, engaging our abdomen and belly, our diaphragm through the rib cage, and broadening our chest and bringing out our sternum, It actually all serves to massage our internal organs, our intestines, and it can actually promote the movement through our intestines and our colon as well. So a suggestion is to implement a breathing practice, even if it's for a couple minutes before we eat, as well as a couple minutes after we eat. It is going to, again, elicit better parasympathetic tone to prepare our body to utilize the nutrition accordingly, and it's going to assist in the digestion of that as well. So let's go back to all of our different nutrients and take a look at the relationship with stress. So as we mentioned before, stress tends to impact the choices that we make about what nourishment we're going to give our bodies. So it is important to focus on complex carbohydrates like whole grains and oats and some nuts and seeds. Complex carbohydrates take longer for our body to digest. That, in effect, supports more of the precursors, the tryptophan, which is going to activate into the 5-HTP. It's going to support more of that getting into our bloodstreams and crossing our blood-brain barrier. It's going to thereby support our ability to manufacture and synthesize and regulate serotonin in the brain. Fiber is a good carbohydrate as well. When we eat foods high in fiber, they remain in our stomach longer. Our body will then absorb carbohydrates more slowly, and thereby promoting a more steady flow of the production and maintenance of serotonin. Fats and lipids, omega-3s. Well, in our body, amino acids or certain, amino acid conversion is already limited normally. It's just something difficult for our body in general. But when we are under stress, the stress response compromises this conversion further. When we are eating good fats and lipids, getting good omega-3 fatty acids from things like eggs, nuts, seeds, fish, it enhances our membranes of our neural cells and can turn on the genes that make serotonin. Proteins. The stress response uses and depletes serotonin significantly. So we again are going to need more of that precursor through carbs, which can be enhanced through the eating of fiber, which fiber comes from, of course, fruits and vegetables. Tryptophan works with vitamin Bs like B6, niacin, and magnesium to synthesize serotonin. We can get more tryptophan from things like turkey and bananas. Other certain proteins like phenylalanine, if I'm saying that correctly, and tyrosine. Well, the stress response uses those proteins more and depletes them more inside of us, which goes on to essentially deplete dopamine and norepinephrine. And those promote an alertness. And when we are eating foods like really seeds, fish, meat, eggs, dairy, if you're not sensitive to it, this will assist in the production of more dopamine and norepinephrine. But we have to get good vitamin C in order to metabolize these types of proteins. So going to the micronutrients. Vitamin C, which we can find, of course, in our citrus fruits, oranges, kiwis, etc. enhances stress recovery and resiliency because it supports our adrenal and cortisol processes. It improves our energy. It enhances immune functioning as it reduces oxidative stress. So essentially, what that means is that vitamin C flushes out free radicals, which are the metabolic byproducts of different chemical reactions that occur in our body that need to be eliminated. As we talked about, water carrying away toxins from the brain. Vitamin C can support that. B vitamins, which we can get from, again, fish, eggs, meat, dairy, legumes. B vitamins are in a lot of different foods. Well, B vitamins help us maintain our nervous system, promote energy and mood, again, by supporting the adrenal glands, and maintenance of good blood sugar levels. Minerals and elements. Well, magnesium. Magnesium is lost from cells when under stress. Magnesium is responsible for over 400 life-sustaining functions. That's enormous. It has a role in muscle relaxation, fatty acid formation, which we know we need for cognitive function and good fluid and flexible cells, heartbeat regulation, our ability to make new cells, regulate insulin in the pancreas, which we talked about being so important, and more. Now, magnesium, I don't have a reference for this on the screen, but not long ago I read, I was reading an article, and I read that it apparently over 2/3, it's estimated that over 2/3 of our population is magnesium deficient. And if you think about how important magnesium is for over 400 life-sustaining functions, that's a really big deal. Magnesium is hugely important. And again, we lose so much of it from our cells when they're under stress. And magnesium, of course, can be found in things like dark green vegetables, leafy green vegetables. And selenium, this is really important to our immune function, to our thyroid and adrenal function, which all have a role in mood and energy and weight, and our ability to metabolize. So selenium, when we're under stress, yet again, more is used, and we need more of it. Selenium can be a little tricky to get, but Brazil nuts are one of the most significant sources of selenium. Another one that's tricky to get can be lithium orotate. This is nutritional lithium. I know commonly when we think of lithium, we think of the pharmaceutical, but this is different. Lithium orotate is a naturally occurring mineral. And we understand Americans and actually most of the world population to be significantly deficient anyways in lithium. It is hard to get. One of the best ways to get it is drinking river water, but nobody does that for a variety of other reasons. But lithium can be found in things like cabbage, mineral-enhanced waters, potatoes, tomatoes. But of course, these days we have trouble with the nutritional integrity of some of our vegetables as well. And soils, since the 90s at least, our soil has been very depleted in mineral richness. But lithium is extraordinarily important for balancing basically a tremendous amount of our stress hormones and neurotransmitters. And people who are, because we understand scientifically that so many people are deficient in lithium anyways, the average non-chronically stressed person is going to be able to survive and function well through that. But when you are in a state of chronic or prolonged stress, that is not going to be the case. The deficit is going to be quite impairing, and it has a effect across all elements of mood, whether that is the ability to achieve contentment, a sense of stability. Deficiencies under stress can cause a lot of sleep can't say disturbance, agitation, irritability, etc. And minerals and elements, chromium, which essentially, again, stress uses a lot more of it and decreases our stores. It works to enhance the action of insulin. And chromium is already something that is low in our gut and hard to absorb. But in essence, having enough assists in how we metabolize carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, which we know are so important, and helps the body use glucose properly and efficiently, which again is the preferred fuel of our central nervous system. And we can get chromium from things like shellfish, if you're not allergic, or broccoli, the miracle vegetable, right? High in magnesium, high in chromium, among other things, B vitamins. Okay. So, putting this all together, let's think of some general considerations for our diet and wellness balance. So, essentially, based on all that preceding information, it would be important for us to avoid the standard American diet, the SAD diet as an acronym, which encompasses bad fats, processed foods, foods treated with pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, GMOs, meats and dairy that are treated with hormones and antibiotics, essentially different. When we eat food that has been treated with hormones and antibiotics, it has an erosive effect to us. In many cases, certain elements can actually cause our body to, I don't know if I'm saying this well, but when certain meats are treated with certain hormones, the way in which our body processes them can actually identify certain things as phytoestrogens, as an example. A lot of research has looked into how our meat and dairy supply in the United States has maybe contributed to earlier ages of puberty or menstrual irregularity in women or menopause difficulties, cancers, etc. Of course, avoiding simple carbs, we talked about that, caffeine, sugar, artificial sweeteners, etc. What we might want to do is include more whole foods. And I made this up myself. I call it the GLAD diet, but it stands for the Good Living American Diet, but that is just something I made up, where from, again, synthesizing all the information, it leads us down the path of wanting to eat good fats, real foods, nutrient-dense foods, buying and eating organic or non-GMO when at all possible, free-range, grass-fed, wild-caught, humane-raised meats, poultry, fish, choosing complex carbohydrates, and water and herbal teas with no caffeine, etc. Beyond the basics is bonus foods. There's no acronym here, but fermented foods are very high tend to be very high in vitamins, in enzymes, and minerals. Bone broths, very high, again, very nutrient dense. Fresh herbs and spices, again, giving us more of that nutrient density. Same thing for sprouted seeds and beans. Raw apple cider vinegar is something folks probably have heard about with the mother in it. Again, high in vitamin and mineral and enzymes and prebiotics, which we'll talk about in a moment. Sea vegetables, again, highly nutrient dense. And organ meats. I don't eat them, but if you are willing to, of course, eating liver, etc., is extremely high, you'll get a higher quantity of the nutrients in those types of meats. I can't do it though. Not for me. So a bit more beyond the basics, eating for a healthy immune system, making sure we eat foods, lots of fruits and vegetables, high in antioxidants so that we can again eliminate the free radicals from our bodies. Fiber we spoke about, water we spoke about. And really you have another handout that goes and lists more about this. In your email attachment, eating for a healthy immune system. And it talks about things we want to incorporate as well as things we want to avoid, which, as you can imagine, a lot of it is overlapping. So what about supplements? Well, food is always best because our body is doing the processing in it. It's taking from its natural source and processing it. But that always is not, it might not be adequate because again, if we're having difficulty yielding the proper nutrients from our food because of how they were grown, you know, we are not necessarily going to know that this carrot we're eating has more vitamin A than that carrot we're eating, etc. So also when the stress response depletes our nutritional stores, we may we may be, again, making poor choices because of the stress, but additionally, even if we're making very good choices, we might not be able to eat in the quantity needed to yield the amount of vitamins, nutrients, proteins, etc., that we need to replenish the stores and maintain our health and wellness. It's important to know that not all supplements are made equal. We have to pay attention to the mystery behind that as well. Some general considerations are looking for supplements that have high visibility. They tell you where their products are sourced from. They tell you how much, of course, is of the nutrient is a part of it, what the dosage is, of course, but also looking at, does this supplement have binders, fillers, and dyes, and what was the process used to render these supplements? A lot of times, if a company is invisible about that, there can be a lot of behind the scenes erosion to those supplements. In America, our FDA regulates that as long as the product started one way, it can be marketed and sold that way. It doesn't necessarily mean what is in the tablet or the capsule is in fact still that way. So what I mean by that is different manufacturing and distribution processes can erode the integrity of the vitamin. So what started as a B complex might be marketed as it, but it might not actually have all that it says it has in there because of how things like binders, fillers, dyes, high heat processing, etc. has eroded it. So just as a rule of thumb, purchasing supplements from manufacturers and distributors that have very visible and informational practices that you can easily find, whether it's on the bottle or when you visit their website. And of course, those that don't include binders, fillers, dyes, etc. Of course, just like with utilizing nutrition from food, we have to have proper digestion, absorption, and metabolism in order to utilize the nutrient from the supplement as well. And of course, just because it's natural doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. We need to realize that there are certain contraindications and could be reactions to certain vitamins and mineral supplements as well. Along the lines of gut health, again, you have to have a good gut. Your gut needs to, your microbiome needs to be in good balance. So We have a lot of gut health destroyers. Unfortunately, stress is definitely one of them. It's going to shift and change the way in which our microbiome, our digestive tract, operates. It's going to certainly be compromised by the use of antibiotics. Antibiotics are fantastic. They help us fight infection. They're important, but they do not, they're not selective, if you will. They're going to kill good and bad bacteria. Of course, some are geared towards fighting certain types of bacteria specifically, but they also will kill other kinds of good bacteria as well. And we need good bacterial balance in our gut to digest properly. Medications, interestingly, those that are commonly prescribed for conditions of the gut also cause destruction to the gut, like proton pump inhibitors, not allowing for acid regulation, and oftentimes stifling that, which goes against the ability for our important digestive enzymes to flourish and thrive in our microbiome, and thereby work on the food we eat correctly. Aging, poor diet, preservatives, chlorinated water, and environmental toxins also contribute to imbalance in the gut. We know that the brain and the gut are highly interconnected. We know that mood and the gut are highly interconnected as well. And probiotics, when we think about healing the gut, we might consider the benefit of probiotics. They help us improve that microbial balance. Because of that, it helps us in the production of vitamins. It aids in the enzyme production in our stomach, in our guts for digestion. It protects the lining of our gut from bad bacteria. Some folks may have heard of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and leaky gut and these different kinds of GI conditions. Essentially, though, when we have poor gut lining, things are in fact going to leak and overgrow in places we don't want them to. And that can lead to more immune activation and, of course, a whole cascade of those dominoes. Probiotics can stimulate antibody production, helping promote our immune system. And of course, the balance of them is imperative. We have trillions of gut bacteria inside of our guts. Prebiotics. Prebiotic foods like prebiotics are found in things like celery, onions, garlic, etc. Prebiotics are a fiber that our body actually cannot digest itself, but the gut bacteria in our body does. The gut bacteria, if you will, you can say that it absorbs it, it eats it. So this is food for the good gut bacteria in our stomach. It helps our gut bacteria produce nutrients for colon cells and can improve our overall metabolic health. Enzymes, digestive enzymes. There are particular enzymes for different kinds of foods, whether it's fats, proteins, and I don't think I want to say lactase, but different enzymes for us to digest dairy, digest meats with protein, different dairy fats, things like that. Enzymes, of course, aid in digestion. They help us break down our food and use it as energy, break down our food into nutrients, and it facilitates the absorption of nutrients in our guts. So if our gut, again, has a need, which most of our American guts do for a variety of reasons, to be improved in its overall health, probiotics, prebiotics, and digestive enzymes can be helpful. So going even further beyond the basics, There are folks who actually have studied spiritual nutrition, pairing up what we understand about the color of the foods that we eat by way of our color matching chakras and body regions. So an example, as you can see from this chart, follows from left to right. And you have another handout sheet in your email. So this, of course, all can be a bit overwhelming. And certainly we have noticed over the course of the past 10 years for sure, how much food is increasing in price at the supermarkets. It may not be feasible or realistic for everyone to buy everything that's organic. And again, just because it's organic doesn't mean that it has more vitamin or mineral content to it or more protein in it. It just means that it doesn't have some of the extra added, more erosive kinds of ingredients to it, like pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, hormones, antibiotics, etc. But anyways, it can be difficult, of course, to think about how in the world am I going to shift and change? And I will tell you, it is complex. It is a challenge. When I was moving through my shift and change initially, many years back now, it took me a minimum of 7 months. I remember it was the reason why I got a smartphone so that I could Google things in a store. But I would be in a store for, a couple of hours. And that was hard, especially if I had my then 2-year-old in tow. But it can be very difficult and it takes a lot of time and research, but there are definitely strategies and ways that we can learn how to shop differently than before and still find things in quality, quantity, and on sale or with a coupon. But it took me a long time to get used to it. But some of the strategies is shop the perimeter of the store. The insides of the store are going to be more processed foods and foods that are more curious and confusing. And what makes it even more confusing is that stores like Whole Foods, they do not have only good products on their shelves. They do incorporate different products that you will still pick up and look at the ingredients and find that there's high fructose corn syrup on there, which is a chemically engineered form of sugar to put in a product. But shopping the perimeter, this is where we find our fresh and non-processed foods. So again, trying to buy fresh. Reading the labels, getting to know and understand what ingredients are and what they aren't. Knowing the dirty dozen, which I have a slide for, I think I can advance for you quickly. So every year, the Environmental Working Group puts out a list of the dirty dozen and the clean 15. So essentially, it helps a consumer know what the current state of chemical treatment our produce is in. So the dirty dozen are the top 12 in order of fruits and vegetables that have the highest amounts of residues in them. So if you are wanting to be more conscious about making a choice, what do I really need to buy, organic or not? The dirty dozen will tell you these are the 12 that you want to really avoid. If you can buy them in organic, please try. And on the flip side, you have the clean 15, which are the years understanding of the least amounts of fruits and vegetables that have the residuals in them. So in other words, I may in the store want to opt to buy organic strawberries when I can, but I know that I don't necessarily need to buy my avocados or my corn organic. Now going back, all natural again is very mysterious because we don't have a regulated definition of that in our country. All natural can mean a whole variety of things, and it can make it very confusing because again, just the example I gave you about MSG can be misleading, and all natural doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't other kinds of influences to that product. Of course, try to shop the sales when you see that certain kinds of dairy, meats, fish, and produce are on sale. Use coupons, they do have them. Even independent stores for natural food stores, health food stores, they run sales, specials, coupons. You oftentimes can get coupons online by going to a certain product company that you have come to know and trust, and you can find even freebies. Buy in bulk. If you buy in bulk, you may be able to, of course, reduce the overall cost. Buying frozen can be helpful. Frozen organic fruits and vegetables may in fact be cheaper, and of course you can keep them or purchase them year round. Buy local because it's going to be fresh, and of course support local businesses, but you also may have more confidence in the local farmer in your area that you can also find at farmers markets. Regrettably, the slide dropped. Sorry about that. You have in your reference and resource handout, though, a link. I do a full day presentation of this, so I just happened to drop the slide I see to shorten it. But in Connecticut, there is a program where you can buy double of a food stamp worth for produce at farmers markets. So I forget what the program is called off the top of my head, but you have it in your reference and resource where yourself or others you can recommend can participate in that program and actually yield more quality produce utilizing food stamps. And of course, we can grow our own, which Connecticut doesn't necessarily have the best year-long seasonal platform for that, but we do get a window of some goodness for different fruits and veggies, mostly veggies. But you can grow your own. I've never been a green thumb myself, but you can grow your own salad in your yard for sure. I know people who do it. All right. So in all, we have taken a really big look at some big stuff and covered the gamut of how nutrition is really a part of our entire being across mind, body, emotions, and spirit. Nutrition is huge, not just because we eat hopefully 3 times a day, maybe possibly 5, not necessarily looking at your intake routine, but really the fact that there's so much about nourishing ourselves that we have not learned. And now that we've learned it, how much of it can empower the way we think about our choices and how we can actually promote our self-care, promote our health and wellness, recover from stress, and manage stress along the way. So ultimately, you are armed with information to empower your choices, to create more opportunities and unfold some new experiences in your life. So we've got about 10 minutes. If, of course, the group has closing remarks of their own, but I'm happy to field and address any questions, comments, or concerns.
Thank you so much, Amy.